Hello and welcome to the Juggling Podcast, a Patreon exclusive episode number 21. Joining me is Juliane. Say hello.
Hi everyone.
And I am Luke Burridge, of course. Thank you all to all our Patreon supporters, especially this time out because this has been delayed for a few days because I was thinking what we're going to do. We've been invited, in early July, I was invited to the French Juggling Convention.
Yes.
And I thought, well, this is interesting. A convention is happening, not just a little one, but like a national convention, which we'll get onto in a second. A national convention is being organised, and I was invited along. But of course, because of this kind of thing, limited funds and all of that kind of stuff. But one of the main reasons why we could afford to go to the French Juggling Convention is actually Patreon money and Patreon support for this year.
Absolutely.
This has made it, and we have no problem at all going, all right, this is a little bit out of our financial breadth. At the moment, our financial reach, if you'd say, but due to Patreon support and some other support from other places as well, we could make this trip a reality and get away from Berlin, get away from Germany for a little bit. So I do want to start off by saying a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. Oh no, and again, I also said that we're going to save the July podcast to the end of July so we could do a podcast about the French Juggling Convention and about all the coronavirus issues of doing juggling convention with coronavirus, social distancing, etc. So this is kind of Corona mid-lockdown part 2 because we had a Corona lockdown episode before. Yeah. This is Corona lockdown part 2.
How social life continues amongst the pandemic and how it can happen.
Yeah, how things could happen throughout this. So we've got things to talk about there. But just for a start, a big thank you to all of our patrons for, well, this is actually for August, so let's just go through this one. Joel and Kathy. Actually, Kathy is a patron supporter, but also my mother. And so big thank you to my mother for also giving a little bit of money towards this trip as well. They said, because I, chatting with them, and they said, it'd be great if we could send you a little bit of money to help out with this trip, which again is highly needed. Chris S. Martin, Flo Ma, and again, Flo is your mother, who is also a patron supporter as well. So your parents have also helped out with this trip. Ben Cornish, Matt, Simon, Craig, Gerald, Lars, Mark, Robert, Juliana, you're still a supporter of me as well,
I'm
Juliana.
Supporting us.
Keith, Jeremy, who is our latest, Jeremy Geddes, you should check out his artwork. I'm a big fan of his artwork, and he's a fan of my other podcast as well. So thank you very much to Jeremy Geddes. If you've seen our podcasts and any things from or live streams, there's a picture in the background in our office. Right. That is a print of Jeremy Geddes' art. So
and we have another one in our living room.
Oh yeah, another one in our living room. So thank you very much, Jeremy, for being a $5 supporter as well. Pierre is $2 per month, and then lots of other, about 40, 50 other people who are $1 a month supporters, who I am not going to name all the way through, but just thank you so much for everyone who's done this.
Very appreciated.
Anyone who has been a supporter in the past, who is somehow still listening to this, thank you very much, even if you've cancelled. A few people have cancelled their support for last month, but then again, it's been made up by new people as well. So thank you very much again. You have made this entire trip possible, and also this kind of podcast possible, because your enthusiasm is a great boost to our enthusiasm. So thank you very much, 65, 70 people, who have given us some support over the last few months. Right, let's get into it after all of the thank yous, Patreon support thank yous there. And if you're listening to this and you're not a supporter, just head over to patreon.com/Luke Burridge. $1 of support gets you all of the past podcasts, gets you thanks at the end of the videos and stuff like that. Just to make it very clear, if the audio isn't great, just so you know, we are recording this in a tent on a campsite in France. So maybe we should have mentioned that at the start of this podcast.
Yeah,
that's why.
So that you might hear wind, you might hear other outside noises.
Yeah, but hopefully people get by with that kind of stuff. So let's go back a few months ago, episode, 14, 15, whatever it was. In fact, I could probably just look here. Episode 18, coronavirus quarantine. So yeah, a few episodes ago, we were talking about what it's like to be professional jugglers and a professional artist and things like that during the coronavirus lockdown, going, I don't have a job as a performer anymore. So someone listened to that, and I mentioned it in that podcast episode that one thing that I'm trying to do is kind of like another career, which I started working on. Well, I've been doing this kind of stuff for years, which is game design and game development, computer game design and game development, which I've been thinking about for years and doing lots of stuff with. And last year, in our yearly theme, my yearly theme was Year of Monetization and stuff. And I was like, how can I diversify? And I started getting more into game development. And then mentioning that, somebody who actually listened to the podcast said, hey, I'm starting a new indie game development studio and I need someone to come and do game development with me. Would you like to join in? So thank you very much to Giovanni, who's a listener of our other podcast, our science fiction book review podcast. But yeah, so now I'm actually do have professional work in that way, which is very handy, very handy.
Very, very good.
And straight from doing this very podcast as well. So doing the Patreon podcast actually led to somebody giving me work, which wasn't just juggling gig, which was actually other gigs as well.
It's actually one of the things that I discovered as me working as a singer and singing teacher. Is I am a firm believer in diversifying your work income opportunities. So even if you are very straightforward, have one job, you do this job, anything can happen to that.
Yeah.
So it's always good to have abilities and just knowledge in fields to just go in a different direction.
Yeah.
A pandemic, nobody expected a pandemic.
Yeah, well, that's
right?
the thing. Of course, it's one of these things that, like, oh, I've got a solid job. Sometimes I didn't get as much work as I would like and things, but just generally, like, oh, as long as there's cruise ships, I can keep working.
There will always be cruise ships.
And there'll always be cruise ships. The cruise industry is in a really good shape, and so all of that kind of stuff.
And it went up and up and up and up over the last few years. It was like a blooming economy.
A booming economy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to talk too much about that. I just wanted to be a quick update on our coronavirus things. So let's start off. Training opened at Catapult. Yeah. And they had this thing where they were only allowed 4 people, and now I think 8 people in that studio. And you know what? It was so good to go back to Catapult, not just to start training again at the training space in Berlin, but also just to be around people and have conversations about it. And that's what we're talking about in the last coronavirus update, which is sort of like, oh, I just want to have conversations and talk. And the previous time I was there, and Matthias Romier, who I performed with in the past at many conventions, and we've done street show festivals together back in the day, he's sort of like, yep, I'm training here because tomorrow I'm driving across to, I don't know, Essen or wherever it was, somewhere over in West Germany, and I'm doing a show. And I was like, well, how is that going to work? Like, oh, it's at this old car factory, and I'm going to be on stage, and then they're going to have people spread out, and then there's these different booths, in these balconies, so it's open air, and everyone's spread out. And it's my first show since, well, he's had a kid as well, so he had a baby at the beginning of the year, and so the coronavirus started when he had a 2-month-old baby.
Yeah. And so then suddenly no work. Yeah,
but also he was taking time off for that baby at the start. So he hasn't performed since I don't know, February
December?
or something. I don't know, like really early on too.
Yeah.
So we're talking about that, and he went off to do his first ever gig. So it seems like there are some ways of working with this, sort of like at these people who do street show festivals, it's not working, but companies and cities are trying to replace that with these things sort of like, oh, we'll come and see a show, and they're like really trying to get some art and culture back there.
Yeah.
Again, that's Germany, who has the coronavirus mostly under control. Of course, there's cases go up and cases go down, but there is a kind of acknowledgement that we kind of worked out, I think, mostly what needs to be in place, or like the main vectors of transmission.
Yes.
And if most people are mostly outside, all wearing face masks, when there's lots of airflow, it's one of those things. What is it? It's time, it's time, space, people, place is the thing that you do. Yeah. So the less time that you spend with people, the better. The bigger the space that you spend them in there, the better. The fewer people who are in that place, the better. And and then just like the place, sort of like, and that's more about air movement, stuff being trapped inside. So there is this idea that if you have people in an outdoor area, mostly spread out and wearing face masks, or even not wearing face masks, all of the different tracking things. Again, I'm not a medical expert, but it seems that most of the tracking seems to be, as long as most people are outside, and if you're inside, you're limiting time spent inside, and if you're inside, you shouldn't be close to people, and you should be wearing masks. That's kind of what is cutting down on a lot of the transmission, and it's only when people spend time together, close to people, in an enclosed space for a long time, that's where you start getting it.
If you sit in a restaurant, you don't wear a face mask.
Yeah.
There are multiple people. You talk a lot.
You can't wear face masks sitting while you're eating.
You talk a lot, and then while eating, and then that just spreads around like crazy.
Yeah, people singing together, like everyone in a small room singing. Churches is where it's happening. I saw this thing that it said that taking a flight is slightly more dangerous than getting your hair cut by somebody, but way safer than going to a restaurant, like sitting inside in a restaurant, which is one of those crazy things. Like, oh yeah, if you get your hair cut, you're just sitting there, and the other person has a face mask on, and you wear a face mask just around your ears, and you can get most of a hair. You've gone for a haircut, haven't you?
Like
You've twice now.
Yeah.
And do you feel safe with that kind of thing?
Yeah. It's okay.
Yeah.
They open windows, they let airflow through, and you get a face mask taped to your face.
Yeah.
So
they tape it on there, do they?
Because they need to get access
around
to
your ears
and stuff. And they wear face masks, and the policy is we do now quiet relaxation.
Yeah. No talking.
Not so much talking.
Yeah, you don't want to be doing the talking. You want to be just breathing gently through your nose.
Yeah.
Everybody wearing a face mask. Oh, there's a fly on my microphone. So that's the kind of thing. So let's go. So the training in Catapult is a big open space. They have the doors open, airflow coming through, and training. So I didn't feel bad about that, even though it was really weird. Like, I haven't seen my friends for the first time, and we're coming, and they're just like behind the bar, like in the kitchen area, and I'm outside, and we're like,
hey.
kind of just nodding to each other, and you're like, we realized that there's no way to say goodbye, because that handshake or that hug at the end of a conversation, like, see you later, and you had handshake or high five or fist bump or hug, would be the signal that we have now said goodbye. And now when we walk apart from each other, there is nothing.
It's not awkward.
It's not awkward. We're not like just walking out. We've done the goodbye moments. Even if we spend like another 5 minutes packing up the bags and then leave, it can just be sort of like a wave or like, see it, and like there's nothing there. But because there's not that physical interaction signal between two people, that we have now said goodbye. It was this weird thing we were just talking about, like, oh, there's like the physical contact was the signal that the interaction, we're both happy with the interaction that we've had, and it's now finished. And if one of us just goes, oh shit, I've got a call, I've got to go, and just leaves, nobody goes, oh, I didn't say goodbye or anything like that. And there wasn't that one. So it's this really weird sort of like these social, this is what we're talking about in the previous one, sort of like the different ways we're going to have to come up with different ways of signaling that our conversation has finished, which isn't a handshake or a hug or a whatever.
And I think this is all part of this whole new way of learning how to interact in society right now. Because up until now we've just established patterns, we established ways of interacting, we established ways of being in the world and what we feel comfortable with. And of course, there's always levels of people who don't feel comfortable with a hug, who don't feel comfortable with handshakes and stuff.
Well, that was the thing, moving to Germany for the first time from England. I'm very English, so I was handshaking people, and all our friends in Berlin, they were always going in for hugs, and I was like, oh, right, yes, okay, it's much more huggy here. Even among jugglers, like in the UK, is much more hugging, but sort of like, it's sort of like transitioning over from British handshaking, see you later kind of things to hugging default.
These kind of things, of course, when you enter in a new phase where you either move to a different country with different habits, it's always
I want to talk a bit about that, about the French, which we'll get onto in a minute.
It always feels weird in the first place. But people can get used to different things.
So a few weeks ago, instead of the EJC, because we have a group of friends from Berlin and associated jugglers from around Germany, etc., who at the EJCs we always camp together. I say we always camp. Me and Juliane normally get a get a room or a hotel or something like that. But there's a group of people. We meet up for breakfasts and all that kind of stuff in Berlin. Just generally juggling together. We're all about kind of similar age, around about the similar life situations and things like that. So instead of doing the EJC, we're like, hey, let's get together. Well, it wasn't me, but let's get together for a camping trip in Germany, outside of Berlin, like a few hours north of Berlin. Get together, have a camping trip, and hang out and juggle and play volley club and all that kind of stuff for a few days. And so we did that, and that was the same kind of Berlin breakfast group. Which I can't remember if I mentioned last time, that I was really annoyed that people thought that Zoom calls where we each like have a grid of 12 people or 12 couples staring at a camera while we eat breakfast together was a replacement for social interaction. It was fun, again, the first few times, but it was interesting to hear other people talking about that, those Zoom calls, which kind of I got not depressed by, but I was like, oh, I just want to get up and walk over to someone else and sit down beside someone else and have a conversation over here and then stand up. You know, I don't know, I probably mentioned that on the last coronavirus episode that we did. And it was interesting to hear other people say, oh yeah, I found those Zoom calls fun for the first 3. Yeah. And then when it got to the 4th or 5th one, it was, it just wasn't, it wasn't the fun, the fun thing anymore.
What it comes down to is that when you have a Zoom call, not everybody can talk like at the same time. Yeah. So you always have to have one person talking. So you will always have, with 12 people, one topic that somebody talks about, and then 11 people have to listen to. Yeah. And
that's just not a social situation.
That's a lecture situation. Yeah. That's a seminar situation where you have a topic that everybody agreed on beforehand. We talk about this topic now. Yeah. Right. So to transform that to a social, private, friend situation just doesn't quite work the same way.
It did work at the start when some people were trapped in Spain, some people were trapped in Italy, some people in the UK, some people in Abu Dhabi, lots of people in Germany.
People could go through and that was the topic. Everybody had something to say about.
Yeah, but after a while it's sort of like, all right, now we've got to find something to do. Anyway, skipping on from that, it was great to be around people. It was in this castle. Some people would sit inside and eat. We mostly were doing the outside. It was raining, which sometimes. Bob came along. You'll know Bob from the EJC with his Cafe Cabaret tent. Yeah. And he set that up as a dome. But then actually after setting it up, it was mostly sunny, so nobody really went in there at all. So we spent like 2 days building this dome and a day taking it down. Or we left before it was taken down. Yeah. But it was sort of like, 20 people's full-time job for a day, putting up this dome, and then we hardly used it. But it would have been fun. But we were all camping separately. We kind of fell into some different patterns, sort of like everybody eating outside, like not a lot of hugging going on, although by the end people seem to be a lot more comfortable around each other. I was still not comfortable around each other, but again, saying goodbye to someone, a quick hug, and then you're away apart again. I think it's one of those things where you're like, oh right, okay, I'm okay with that. We're not, and it wasn't even a proper hug, it was kind of more like an arm around the back of the shoulder, sort of like close contact. What I want to talk about though is Volley Club, which we just played. That worked really well. That's all social distancing. We are catching and throwing a single club again, but it's one of those things. Don't throw and catch the club too much, and then touch your face or whatever is going to be happening. Yeah. Combat. Alex said, let's try contactless combat, and so we did that. And the idea being that if you make contact with any part of the other person's body which isn't a club, you lose the point and they win the point. It was really good fun as a game that wasn't combat, but was like a different thing.
Okay,
if you know what I mean.
Why was it not combat?
Because you can win a point by the other person knocking your clubs out of the pattern and you dropping, and they continue juggling, but you win the point because they touched you. Right. I think a definition of combat has to be, again, I have not talked about this with the guys and who were playing this and trying this out, Alex and me and Andreas and other people who've now played it in Berlin. Yeah. The definition of combat, I think, is the last person juggling 3 clubs wins. Yeah. If it's a game which isn't the last person juggling 3 clubs wins, it's combat-like because you're still trying to... You're still trying to knock the clubs out. But in the end, what we were doing was sort of like, we're like, oh, if somebody's foot touches my foot... So you were using your body to cause a mistake. Yeah, we were causing somebody to touch you. So it felt like a weird, like a game of tag, tig, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Where you're like someone is trying to touch you, but you're not trying to... What's that game where they play where somebody is... Where you see people standing around in a circle and you take turns, like one person swipes at one person if they touch, and then everyone pauses and that's it. you've seen that kind of thing that. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like this game where you take. So it felt like a game like that with juggling added to it, and the juggling being added to it is sort of like, oh, there's a one target which is a valid target, which is the juggling clubs, and then there's another target which isn't a valid target. So that the target wasn't just the juggling clubs, and the target was to knock the clubs out of the pattern. Yeah. Wasn't the main way we were winning points.
It becomes more of a game of how can I make my opponent touch me?
Yes, but also but it comes then, how do I make my opponent think that I'm going to be moving in one direction, but then move in a different direction? But the point is, you could play this just holding, like, if you just had a balloon in your hand, and the other person had to touch the balloon.
A needle.
Yeah, and a needle. So you have a needle and you have a balloon with a needle attached to it, and you have to bump your balloon with a needle attached to it onto someone else's balloon, and then it pops that balloon. But also, if you touch their body in any way with either your club or with the balloon, even if it's not the pin part, like a pin. So it feels like this game could be played just holding a balloon with a pin.
Yes.
And the other person holding a balloon with a pin. It's the same game. Actually, the juggling is reduced down. I posted a clip on Instagram of us playing this, which you can find me and Andreas, and we're playing to 10 points, and it's a really fun game. But as you see, I put in like the last 5 points of that game or whatever. One of those points is Andreas knocking my clubs away, and 4 of the points is us tricking the other person into swinging their hand.
You touched my toe or something.
But that's the thing, like, we both, as soon as we were like, all right, we could touch the foot, all of the points were like each individually moving our foot before the other person moves their foot. So if the other person moves their foot to the same place, so we're actually just playing a game of like, I want you to tread on my foot while you want me to tread on your foot. So whoever manages to move our foot to the right place.
Exactly.
And if we both pick the same place, whoever gets there first. And if we don't pick, so we're always both just sort of like moving our feet around. Like that was always the thing where we got together, juggling, and then we'd like brush our foot across to the side, and we were both laughing about the fact that we were like, oh, this is not a juggling game anymore.
No, and I think this is the kind of thing that it's a new exploration of new ways, and then you find, okay, if we put this in place, then something else happens. And here, what happened was you said, oh, no touching, and touching means the other person gets the point. Yeah. It makes it a completely different game.
Yes.
So then you need to think, okay, how can we then make it so that strategy isn't a valid strategy for the other person to gain points?
Yeah, but that then we're doing rules analysis again. We're doing game design here as someone who is now doing game design professionally. I mean, I've done this all before. Like lots of the things that we do at juggling conventions, like the British Young Juggler of the Year. Lots of the game, like the format of games that we play, like kind of now normal formats for juggling convention games. The idea when you're doing combat or the big gladiators kind of thing, at the end of the games, you'll have a one round and the winner sits out, and then you get 4 winners and then they'll go together. That was something that I came up with to try and reduce the randomness a bit of those things, because at the EJC you would have, like 300 people coming in, and you'd get 1 winner at the end of it, and everyone would be like, they just hung out by the side for too long, and the best players didn't get there because they were knocked out randomly early on. So having like 4 rounds, 3 or 4 or 5 rounds,
takes
and then putting those people in,
that
was something that I introduced at juggling conventions like 12 years ago when I was doing organising the games at the EJC, and now that's become like a normal format. The Fight Night Combat format that we developed. All of these kind of things are game design, and you need to put in place a mechanism. The mechanism design that you want is that you need to go, how do I make it that the rules are in line with the incentives of the game? And if the game is don't touch anybody, social distancing, penalizing somebody for you touching them sounds like the correct thing for social distancing, doesn't it? It sounds like it.
Yeah.
However, it's not true, because what you're actually incentivizing is, how can I get the other person to touch
me?
How can we get us both to touch each other and it not be my fault?
Yes.
And so actually what we're doing by saying contactless combat is, like, by putting a points incentive into avoiding contact, what you're actually doing is encouraging contact between 2 players.
Yes.
It's not social. Contactless combat is not social distancing.
No.
And again, it's difficult for me to, that's why I just spent 10 minutes talking about this, but like the incentives, the game incentives have to be in place, that we need to unincentivize two people getting close to each other if we're going to play contact, and we want them to not be literally putting their armpits in each other's faces, like,
yes.
you know. So that's what I wanted to bring up to. Now we get invited to the French Juggling Convention, and I was like, contactless combat is probably going to be too difficult to do in any terms of like a fight night, because like the qualifications, we had 18 people take part in the qualifications, and to have like everybody understand contactless combat all the time doesn't work. So for the fight night at the French Juggling Convention, let's just transition into that. And the combat, I put in place a rule that just you're not allowed to grab somebody else's club.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to grab somebody else's body.
Swapping clubs.
Swapping clubs isn't allowed. Part of it's just sort of like, we don't want people touching each other's clubs too much, which we'll get onto in a minute. But also it means that a lot of the situations where two people are coming close, it's like one person trapping the arm of the other person in their club under their body and pulling them. Not allowed. There's a club goes high, and then two people go for the same club, and you always see this with two big guys, tall guys, and they're like jumping up at the same club, and they're pushing each other open. There's lots of collisions into each other, and I think most of the collisions happen when two people are aiming for the same target. So it's not that we're saying if you touch the other person you're out, which contactless combat means, I want them to touch me. It means that what are the incentives of touching the other person, because a lot of that is sort of like grabbing for their clubs. Two people both going for the same club at the same place in the air, or even in a pattern. You're like grabbing the clubs and things like that. So just saying you have to end the point with the same 3 clubs that you started with, and you're not allowed to grab the other person's club, trap it under the arm, like do all those kind of things. Adding to the idea that there was this one guy who just like swung his foot up and kicked somebody else's club out, and we're like, look, let's not do that either. Generally, kicking other people's clubs.
But that's generally also not like in
it's
the
not
normal
encouraged.
rules.
It's just too dangerous.
It's also excluded.
Yeah, because people don't see if someone suddenly kicks their leg up into someone's pattern, people don't notice that. And it did work, actually. I think the whole thing, it did feel a little bit more distant. We already have a socially distant handshake at the start of the points, which is you tap the clubs together, and then instead of hugging or shaking hands or whatever you do normally at the end of a round, especially in the fight night, you just do a tap, that kind of thing. Some people did go for the hug, but in other people you could see they went for the hug. This was the French convention, and the other person didn't want the hug, so there was kind of like this kind of twisting away, like
kind of thing,
hugging each other but with their heads and bodies facing in two different. I think it's called the Christian side hug, where you hug someone like from the sides. There's not front to front sexy contact. Of course, it's not sexy contact.
It's not about sexy. No, but you can definitely tell that with the different kind of cultures. I personally think the French had a way more difficult time to not go for body contact.
Well, let's finish up here with the combat. I'm saying that I actually quite like this rule, even as somebody who likes stealing other people's clubs, who likes grappling the clubs again. It's one of my favorite things, and people going boo like that, but it creates for me a different level, a different dynamic of combat. But I actually think it's not maybe a better game, but it still feels very, very combat, but in a way it kind of feels more combat. It's like more pure, like you're
actually going way more for the clubs within the pattern. Like it was, I saw way more points where it was just really clean. You juggle, you tap your club, and you get the club of the other person's pattern. That just is so satisfying.
And the mindset of like, two people just throw their clubs up in the air and then like run to the same spot, and whichever club's available, they both start snatching at it. It's fun, it's dramatic, but it is messy, and it creates way more times when both players drop, because of course both players drop, because both players are going for the same club, and they're using their physicality to bump into each other and disrupt not each other's pattern, but each other's path to the same club. They're trying to disrupt the other person's arm or hand to reach up and grab the same club that they're going for. So it benefits taller people, it benefits bigger people, and by saying you have to end with the same 3 clubs that you started with, and you're not allowed to steal or trap or grapple somebody else's clubs or body, it really does make a big difference. It's a cleaner game, it's more satisfying, and there's way fewer instances of both players dropping at the end, because when both players dropped at the end, it wasn't because they were both going for the same club and they both failed. It's sort of like one person dropped and then the other person did a stupid mistake, and I much prefer that one person makes the other person drop, they drop, and then they don't recover properly, and they also drop, rather than both people just failing to get the same club.
Yes.
And I think I prefer this form of combat.
Yeah.
Contactless combat is a fun game, but
Yeah.
combat where you aren't allowed to steal clubs is actually, I think, a purer form of what combat could be, is.
Yeah.
And I think it might be that in the future, that rule is just part of Fight Night combat, because it makes it less dependent on the physicality. It makes it more welcoming. It makes it more about juggling skill. It makes precise attacks much more valid and much more important. And I say that as somebody who loves stealing other people's clubs, who loves grappling other people's clubs. But yeah, like it makes it more inclusive, maybe better for, you know, smaller people to take part, better for women to take part. It's less aggressive. It's much more about like scooping that club away from somebody else's pattern than jumping higher.
Also for the audience, for me as a person watching it, it makes it cleaner because you can see what happens, and it feels like something way more skillful when you juggle your 3 clubs and then the opponent is next to you and you just tap the club out. It looks so elegant.
Yeah, it is more elegant.
It's just a really, like, you should incentivize this kind of, like this, you can get like whatever, you have an extra B, a point for like you know how it's like A and B point, a B point for, like, you get an extra thing for the very nice and clean kind of attacks.
Yeah.
That would be fun, because then you incentivize the positive things.
I think what we should actually do, if we're going to do this, I think any hard, violent hit, I think this will be the next combat rule, any violent hit which hits somebody, like on the wrist or hand, like too violent. Like, it's okay if someone swings their club out. I do this all the time. Someone swings their club out to hit my patterns and I just raise my arm up and block their club on my arm. I think that's fine.
Because that's a defense thing.
It's a defensive move, and if they hit me on the arm or fingers or hand because I'm moving my hand up to block, that's fine. But nobody needs to be incentivized at like really slamming, you know. And a few guys, some of the French guys play a little bit rougher than we do in Germany. We've realized that just like really slamming the club down at other people's hands and wrists is a bit too much. So maybe a rule to get rid of that. Or put it this way, if you do that, you lose a point. Not like you get bonus points for being finesse, you lose points if you aren't finesse.
But then it's weird again, because then it has already happened, first of all.
What?
So somebody has done the violent attack and then they get punished. What I think we should have in mind is that people don't do that in the beginning.
But I'm saying if we just make it can just be there for a while and then people will stop playing that way. That's what I'm saying. It's the same way that for a while at the fight nights we had the iPad with the timer, with the, you know, the basketball timer that would count down. So like you have to start the next point within that 20 seconds or 24 seconds or whatever it was. And if you both drop, you've got 14 seconds to pick up again. And I put that in place and suddenly the whole game speeded up, and we don't need that anymore because now the game has speeded up. You know what I mean? There's some things that you put in place, everyone learns that new culture, that new way to solve the problem of like, let's get things moving, you know, the different qualifications, you put them in place, people then learn, oh, this is how you do it fairly, and then you pick it up. So we can just move on with that.
I actually want to say something here. Because what you just said feels very much like this gets the whole corona in society down to the point. In the sense of that everything is always evolving. There's never a state of this has always been like this, and this is the state of this is the concrete that put in, like, this is fixed. It's never fixed. Nothing is ever fixed. And I think this is what we definitely learned by having suddenly a pandemic coming all over the place. Every society is interrupted. Every behavior is learned. So everything has been interrupted, and we have to think in new ways and come out of this with, okay, this is how we did it before the pandemic. This is how we did it during the pandemic. And now at the end we have to come out with something where we combine everything to come out in a better way. Not saying like after the pandemic everything has to go back to how it was before, because it can't. And so we have to adapt in this way. And so this is a kind of a nice way of showing that. And combat is an evolving sport. It is
it's going to change.
It's always changing.
A coronavirus is definitely going to be an incentive for me to say, look, if you want to play combat, whatever you like, in any way, everything is... Oh, I'm just clicking Juliane's microphone. Just drop it again, that's fine. Everything is going to be, like, if you want to play combat or gladiators or whatever you call it, that's fine. But as the commissioner of Fight Night Combat and who has the format does this kind of thing, I think if we just put in place this just for now, this is probably enough. You're only meant to, if you're going to do Fight Night Combat, do it in open air, an open air area.
Yeah.
And have have everyone spread out and stuff when things like that, and it's fine. And then you can do the qualifications and do the normal tournament in this way. Only end with your 3 clubs, and I think only end a point with your own 3 clubs. No hugs and stuff. Just the tapping club salute. I think that's enough for Fight Night Combat to be continuing and safe at these events. Again, the juggling events that are going to happen. That's what we're going to talk about now, more specifically about the French Juggling Convention and our experience there.
I would also suggest, if you have the qualifications and you're using the sheets of paper, get enough pens so everybody has their own pen.
Yeah, but it was difficult for people to keep track of pens. People don't do that.
But in general, if you should put that in place so it gets more of a habit.
All right, so let's move on. So we were invited to the French Juggling Convention, and I was like, ask Juliane, would you be up for this? Because I was told by Rico, who organised it, they have a restricted number of people are allowed to come, so that's why they didn't advertise it widely, because they wanted it mostly to be word of mouth advertising among French people. So it was mostly like the vast majority of people were from France.
Yes.
And with a few
from Spain.
I think there was some people.
Somebody from Argentina.
Yeah, no, but they were living in France. Those are people who were already in France. I think that was the point.
Well, she couldn't speak French.
Okay, whatever. Okay,
maybe. I don't know.
She was around. So either way, you can be stuck with coronavirus lockdown. You can be stuck in a country where you don't speak the language.
Obviously, yes, of course.
I don't know the full story about that. Anyway, so the idea being, it was limited to 450 people. It was all going to take place in an open air venue, except for the sports hall, and the sports hall was going to have restricted numbers and stuff. This is what Rico told me beforehand. So I asked Juliane, would you be up for that? And we can also do a camping trip in France afterwards, because we've been since the Toulouse EJC, when we had a few weeks beforehand camping and traveling around France. We're like, we just like going to camping in the municipal campsites in France. We should do that again sometime.
It's great. Municipal campsites in France are one of my favorites.
Yeah, and we were already planning on maybe doing a French trip this summer as well, and then we're like invited to France. Yes, we can put it all together, and we did that kind of stuff. So we agreed to go over there. Took a few days to drive down. We got set up with our tent. Again, there's a whole vlog about this where you can see us talking about the different restrictions in place.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, let's just talk about some of the things that I noticed. I noticed that French jugglers are from a different kind of social background than German jugglers. Like, our German juggling meeting was lots of people, like, everyone is sort of like super middle class, everyone's a computer programmer. If they're not, they're a professional juggler or some kind of artist or something like that. Our group of friends, everyone's having babies and settling down together and things. And in France, it's very much like people with dreadlocks. It's very counterculture. It's everybody had their tops off.
Oh yes, that was a big thing in the convention. It felt like the pinnacle of feminism. It was
I would say everyone have the tents off. Yeah, men and women walking around because it was so hot with their tops off.
Some women started taking their tops off as well. It was super hot. So some women started that, and then you could see over the time that more and more women,
it was just like,
including
this
me,
is what we can do now.
Didn't wear. Because for guys it's normal, right?
Yeah,
you take your t-shirts off, you don't even think about it.
Yeah, that didn't make the vlog though. We didn't include topless women in the vlog.
But it happened, and I thought that was really cool. But also, I think that showed really much the kind of people who were there.
Yeah.
And there were like lots of flowy and
lots of flow
people and.
But I'm just saying, even the jugglers that are hanging out there, I'm just saying that, like, it's not everybody is like that, but it tends more towards that, in that direction. And I think those kind of people are a lot more kind of like maybe free and easy. Again, I'm just massively generalizing here, but I'm just saying the population of people at a French juggling convention, especially this French juggling convention, which is an open air festival organized at the last minute. Not organized at the last minute, but just sort of like, hey, the EJC isn't happening, there's a slot in the calendar for French people to get together.
And it has happened there before. So
and Rico has organized a French juggling convention in the same place.
Yeah.
For that convention, he had 2 big tops up. We had a bar tent and a party tent,
Yes.
and also a big show venue tent where you could fit. And then of course it wasn't restricted, but they were like, at this site we could do this. So yeah, just sort of like the general population. But it was, I think, again, I have different things to talk about, but we kind of covered quite a lot of it in the video. Sort of like in the gym, it got to the point. Well, most people were wearing face masks. Everyone who was going into the gym, there was a check. It wasn't a badge check at the door. It was, do you have a face mask check?
Yes.
And spray your hands.
And disinfect your hands.
Disinfect your hands, take your shoes off, and you're allowed to go into the gym with a face mask on. And that was fine. I think the number of people that were allowed into the gym was a little bit high. It felt in the end, I could see what they're saying. Oh, everyone is, if you have this many people and everyone is spaced equally, you have this amount of space between each one, and if you're wearing face masks, that's fine. But the thing is, people in a juggling gym, at Catapult, everyone just spreads out, and everyone has like a corner of the hall. Like if you have 8 people training in there,
you have a set place where you stay. But in a hall like that,
it doesn't quite work the same way.
It mingles a lot more, because then people drop, and then they have
they're
to
walking
go
past you. Yeah.
They need to collect their Diabolo that rolled away, and the ring, and the clubs, and it's way more of a moving organism. It's not like one person is standing or sitting in one spot like you can have in a concert kind of situation, or like a show thing where okay, the audience member is being there, sitting in their spot.
Yes.
In a hall with lots of jugglers moving actively around, that just can't work that way.
Yeah. So I would say if again, a lot of this is sort of like using the French Juggling Convention as a model, as a first attempt at having like
indoor juggling,
a group of jugglers, hundreds of jugglers together in a festival, and how this could work in the future. Here's some lessons learned. I would say allow a few less people in the hall, because they were allowed 70 people in the hall. A few fewer people. So I'm saying like allow fewer people, but not that many fewer people. Yeah. But what I would do is I would have it a little bit more tidy. I would say have a few rules in place. Say, look, you can't leave something in the hall. You can't just leave your stuff around quite so much.
Yeah.
If you do, have a space in the hall where people can leave stuff. If you know what I mean, like have a pile of bags. But because what happens is that the bags are just left on all the way around the edges of the gym.
Yeah, but then you know what you incentivize again.
What?
At the end, everybody's going to the pile, and then you have
whatever.
people
I'm just saying that doesn't have that pile of shit doesn't have to be inside the gym. It can be outside. Just I'm saying have a place. But what happens is that as things, this always happens at juggling conventions, is that people leave stuff around the edge, and then the edge of the hall comes in a bit, and then people leave stuff around that new edge. You get these layers of people leaving bags.
No, but you also have islands.
Yeah,
in
you
the
have
middle.
islands and things like that. Yeah. So I'm just saying, if you just have like a place of like, let's just make it so that there isn't quite as much stuff left around. Fewer people, and also just have somebody going around saying, look, if you're not juggling in here, would you step out the space? Because a lot of the time it's fine for it to become a hangout place, but there was so many other places that you could hang out outside. There was all the benches where the food were, that actually became a pretty good hangout space.
Yes.
So that's one thing I would say.
Now that is all fine and good.
Yeah. Until there's a heat wave.
A heat wave and massive rain and storm.
Yeah.
Where do the people go? Like at the time when, of course, we know, and it wasn't possible to organize any more places, but we had this one hall where up front it was clear 70 people they scheduled to be in the hall.
Yeah.
And when we wanted to do the combat qualifications, suddenly there was a massive storm coming and rain. And
all right, let's talk about this. I was going to talk about that later. An outside festival works if the climate is good for an outside festival.
Yeah.
When we were camping in the north of Germany, it rained for 2 of the 4 days, or whatever it was. We had 2 nice days, which was great, that we could hang out and go for a bike ride.
It was chilly, but it was okay.
Yeah, a little bit chilly, but it was great for playing combat. It was great for volley club, just generally hanging out. And there was a fireplace, so everyone could sit around the fire at the end of the day. And but you kind of needed that fire, because otherwise it would be too cold in the evenings.
Yes.
So you either need somewhere that you can hang out inside where it's warm, but then you can't have that many people hanging out inside. And it doesn't feel as social, or you can have fire pits, and I think that's the thing that you can definitely do. Like for the evenings, fire pits I think is a good idea, that people can be spread out around it and staying warm.
If it's not raining.
If it's not raining. And that's the thing. Since it starts raining or there's storms. So I think this is going to be very tricky to go, oh, we'll just have an open air event. That can work in France, in the south of France, or in the middle of France. But they even had it in the mountains because then it doesn't get quite so hot there. But then there was a heat wave and the temperature was getting up to 38 degrees at whatever some point.
So there were a few trees.
Yeah.
And then there was literally like there was a line of shadow.
Yeah.
And in the mornings, everybody was hanging out in that line of shadow. And the more it moved on, the narrower the shadow got.
Yeah.
So you'd really see that people really were looking for the shady places.
And there just wasn't there. So I think lots of places which are kind of mostly empty, but also shade. So if you're going to have a big top, but have it like no sides to it, like no sides at all, so the air can just flow through. And what you have is just shade from the sun.
Yeah.
And
until the storm comes and the wind blows
again,
over.
And that's the thing. It's very difficult to plan all of this in the mountains, and then the storms come. So I think it's going to be much more difficult for most countries or most environments to say, oh, we'll just have it outside and just hope the weather is fine. Even conventions which have massive big tops and massive halls and all that kind of stuff are up against it with the weather. In the north of England, in Newark, for the EJC, it's sort of like, how do you, like, the place that they had is a showgrounds, and the showgrounds used to be an airfield in the Second World War, and the reason it was there is because it was so open and flat, and that it made it easy for the planes to take off into the wind. So they're actually optimizing for wind, and then they hold a juggling convention in a place which is optimized for wind. And so, that's it. And there's no shade because it's a showground, but there are these big halls. Actually, last year's EJC site would have probably been okay for a social distancing because you had all these big halls, but you can't have 4,000 people there, 2,000 people there. That size space for 300 people.
You need to limit the amount of people that you can have inside a venue to the worst case scenario that literally everybody has to go inside that venue.
Yeah.
So you have to make a concept of possibilities, and then limit the amount of people that go if the worst case comes along.
And then that's really tricky because at the French Juggling Convention, that worst case would probably be about 100 people if everything goes wrong and everyone has to sit inside with face masks on or do something inside. You're like, all right, we're probably looking at about 100 people, but then the convention still has to hire this venue and stuff. So it's going to be very, very tricky to find a space which is big enough to have everyone sheltered from any kind of weather event. Yeah. And that the French Juggling Convention had both a heat wave and storms which blew away all the. It literally blew the stage away. Yeah. Blew the toilets over, the open air toilets that they had there. Yeah. Blew all the toilets over. Blew away the bar tent. Blew away all the stuff where the only tent that wasn't destroyed or blown away, which was like a venue tent, was the cooking tent. You know, where they serve the food. Yes. And that's because it was pretty much next to the gym. It was tucked into the gym. Yeah. So open. I don't think just saying, oh, it's an open air festival will solve all the problems. It really won't solve all the problems. No. You'll have new problems. Yeah.
And today we watched a video by the guy Wintergarten.
Oh yeah, the marble machine.
A marble machine, and he brought it down to the point because he said he talked to a friend of his, a Dutch guy, who explained the letting out. Water from a pond.
Yeah, no, let me go for it. So what you have, the idea is that you have a reservoir. It's a fake reservoir, and underneath the water level of the water reservoir is old trees and like buildings and all the stuff that's been flooded. Yeah. And you want to sail the boats around in the reservoir. And as the water goes down, it exposes like the top of a steeple. So you're like, well, that's dangerous for a boat. Yeah. Let's chop that off. Yeah. And then and then the water goes down a little bit more, and you're like, oh, there's another top of a building there. So you just like shave off that top of the building, and then it goes down a bit more, and there's trees sticking, and you're like, oh, let's chop the top branches off, and then it goes down a bit more, and you're like, that steeple, that first thing, there's still more. That's still a problem. We didn't get down to the root of it. So the idea being that like you need to level the entire ground underneath. You need to dredge the entire lake, dredge the entire destroy everything underwater, and then when you let all the water down, it's still smooth and no matter what you do. Yeah. So it's a great parable.
All problems. If you have a problem and you solve the problem, there will be another problem
underneath that problem is another problem. That's a really great thing. I hadn't thought of that. Yes, underneath all of these, we'll just do it with social distancing. You go, well, as soon as you do that, there's another problem that needs to be solved. Now Rico and the team, they went really well. like the idea in the gala show that like the stage is open air worked really well, but also not just because of that. You needed to wait until it got dark for the focus for it to feel like a proper gala show.
Yes.
Like you can have stuff happening on a stage, like the Diablo battle was earlier on in the evening, but it didn't feel like a show. Because here's the thing, with an audience, you want to feel like you're all looking at the same thing.
Yes.
And if you look around and you can see other people in the audience, first of all, you're not looking at the stage, which means you're looking around, you're distracted.
Yeah.
And then if they look at you, they see somebody else who's distracted, and it kills the energy of the show. We've talked about this last year at the EJC. People looking around and seeing other people sleeping is the worst thing. Now, here's the thing. If the audience is in complete darkness, you can get away with that, because it doesn't matter if other people aren't looking at the stage. Because to be honest, if the lights on the stage are bright and you look elsewhere, you can't see anything. So the only focus, like those lights, that's what a theatre is. That's why you have this black box theatre idea. There's a black box, and the only thing that you're looking at, you're not looking at the background because it's black. You're not looking at the sides because it's black. You're not looking at the walls because it's black. You're looking at the one person who is French and rolling around on the floor with a stick and a ball, and you're like, well, that's the only thing I can look at right now. So everybody is looking at the same thing. So if they do something interesting, everybody reacts in the same way,
and then that can get like a potential on top of that, because somebody else laughs and then you find that funny, and then that kind of gets a rolling thing, and that's what the audience is then creating,
which is very different. The atmosphere from an open air show, which say, let's just go to the street show example, we call it a circle show because one person is in the middle and everybody is in a circle around them. Everybody is looking at that person in the middle, and you're looking past the thing that's happening. The backdrop is another audience member who is smiling, looking back at you. You see them smiling, you smile, and the audience energy feeds off each other.
Yes.
So here's the thing. In a socially distancing place where the audience is all spread out, or, you know, the chairs are spread out, or whatever you want to do, again, I actually think that at the French Juggling Convention there wasn't quite enough effort made into separating audience members. But again, it's all open air. Like you see from all these tracing things that they've done now, that like most people in the open air, that's not what we have to worry about. It's if those people were in a small room in that kind of area in the space, you don't want that. But because it was open air and the wind was blowing pretty much all the time, it's possible. I was actually okay with it, even though I think it's my own personal discomfort of just seeing that many people up close. But I had the same thing with like all the protests in America and these protests here, protests there. The open air protests, there isn't actually much evidence showing that that's where the virus is spread happening. It's not happening in these protests and other stuff, because again, it's all happening in the open air, and any kind of one person infected in a group of 100 people, that their viral load or whatever it is, it gets spread out. Nobody is standing in one place for a long time downstream of an air conditioning thing with someone eating and talking, whatever it is, that kind of thing. So that's what I felt okay. But like I say, the audience being spread out worked because the everybody's focus was in one place because it was dark. But then they always had to wait until it got dark, which was sort of like 9:30, 10 o'clock. But then it was too hot to do anything before then. So then, like, the day that we did the Fight Night Combat, we were meant to start at 5:30. In the end, we started about 7 o'clock. Then we had another show after that, and then the gala show started. So the gala show started like 10:30, 11 o'clock, and finished after midnight. But it was kind of okay in that way, because it felt long, but it didn't feel too late, because pretty much because it was so hot, everybody's day was starting at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock anyway.
Yeah, that's when people get active, because the whole day before you just kind of just have to hang out in the kind of every kind of bit of shade that you
So
can
in
find.
this case, the lessons learned was that, okay, it's okay to do an open air show only if the show starts late enough for it to be dark, that everyone's focus is on it, and then the energy works and it feels like a proper gala show, or it feels like a proper event, not like lots of people. And then on the stage it works because you're a performer. I looked out and I didn't see that the audience was all spread out. Like the audience went back, like for a crowd of like 400 people watching the show, it went back a long way, and it was way out to the side, and there was a big gap at the front, which is the worst kind of energy that you want from a show if you're sitting there looking at it all spread out and no energy feeding off it. But when everyone's in the dark, you're just sort of like, oh, people out there and they're clapping. The audience reaction is a bit lower than I would normally expect for this routine. Like I do my three ball and video routine, although without the video this time. The audience reaction was like, oh, that was good. It's normally a bit better for that amount of people, but again, the person clapping, the furthest away person clapping was way further away way than it would normally be for a crowd of that size.
For me, sitting in the audience, it was a pretty strong reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, I didn't see that specific show, but I'm just saying that, like, you were sitting on a chair way out the back by yourself or surrounded. So that's the kind of thing. Open air shows work if it's dark, but then if it's dark, it's going to be late. But then if it's late, you can only do it if people aren't really tired.
Yes.
But then people weren't really tired because they hadn't been active all day because of the heat wave.
Yes.
So it's this thing where it kind of all worked. It's this weird kind of social distancing show works if there's a single focus, only works in the dark.
Yeah.
Dark only works if you can just start late. Starting late only works if people aren't tired. People aren't tired because they weren't doing stuff during the day because everyone's just sitting under the canopies, eating, drinking, and chatting for literally the entire day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a weird setup. It did work, but again, it kind of worked almost by fluke.
Yeah.
I think if people had been way active all the way through the day, and then you start the gala show at 10:30, 11 o'clock, and it goes until after midnight.
Yeah. So you can't be like, unless you have a venue where you can literally close the blinds and make it dark.
But then you're saying we're in a theatre. Yeah.
Yes. And so all these kind of issues just arise as you're doing it. You can't know upfront what's going to happen.
Well, no, you can. You listen to this podcast and you get some ideas. The other thing is, because it went late, the music was stopping. Like the party music was stopping at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So what had happened really was that the whole day, the whole the time frame of the French Juggling Convention was kind of time shifted.
Yeah.
Like it was shifted about 4 hours out.
Yeah.
Like normally you would start, the action's going to start at midday or whatever, once everybody's up and doing things. But here, everything was starting, people were starting to be active at like 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so the whole day of the convention, I even noticed that like on that last day of the convention, we're like, it's 5 o'clock, or no, it's 5:30, and this is the first vlog update for the day.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it was literally just us hanging out under a tree for an entire day, eating, drinking, and then going back and hanging out under a tree again.
Yeah.
That was it. So it's tricky. All right, a little bit more about the show. Having the show open air was really great, so that kind of made me feel a lot more comfortable. The bows and stuff, we didn't practice it, we just talked about it. So the only time I touched anybody in the entire time of the show was when we were standing in a line and I grabbed each other's hand, walked forward, bowed, went back up, and then went and sanitized my hands afterwards.
Yeah.
So that was, I felt okay. Of course, it was a bit annoying that we didn't practice the bow properly, but also it was fine because it was sort of like another moment where we didn't all have to be together touching each other in a small area. So that's just my little thing about bowing, the bows at the end of the show.
Yeah.
Could have been better, but again, that kind of it was affected by coronavirus. What are the things that, I mentioned before in the video, like, people picking up your props in the gym and handing them back to you. There were some of those kind of things. I was like, I just don't. I do this routine where I put my ring in my mouth and then I drop it and you pick it up and hand it back to me. And I was like, well, now I just don't want to put that ring in. Like, I now got to keep track of that ring isn't going to be the one that I'm going to put back in my mouth again for this routine because you, with your sweaty juggler hands, picked it up and given it back. So that's another one of those culture things. If the definition of culture is there was a problem, somebody solved the problem, and the next time somebody had that same problem is you look and go, well, how was this solved before? And you just do the same thing again. Like I say, that's the idea of business culture. Like if you're in a business, what is the culture? Like the EJC, what is the culture? We talked about this with the BJC culture and the EJC culture being there's a culture clash there, is because BJC is like, well, how do we all solve the problem? We just play some Queen music and get everyone to sing along and whatever. Like,
although in this case, I think it's just the way that people think something is polite. If they are next to the ring, they want to be polite by picking it up and giving it to you instead of you having to go then picking up yourself. Of course. So it's a question of what is polite and what in this case is actually polite.
Is that I don't want anybody to touch my stuff or come near me, even if they think they're being polite doing it. And that's what I say. What is the culture now at juggling conventions? What is the culture at training near people? Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And
we have to come up with it. If I drop my ring and it rolls over to you, leave it. You step back, I'll come over, I'll pick it up. And so everyone, when I was training around, people kept on like picking up the clubs and giving them out. I was like, no, don't touch them. And they're like, oh yeah. And I could see their, like, of course I couldn't see their faces properly because they had face masks on, but I could see their eyes going, oh yeah. It's like the first time they'd ever been encountered in that situation because it was the first time that they've been training in a gym with a face mask on next to other people training.
Exactly. So it's something that you have a certain habit and then this habit gets interrupted and you have to relearn to be polite again. in the sense that politeness is then actually meaning stepping away from it.
Yeah. Also, I found, maybe it was a language barrier kind of thing, that it was a lot of French people. I found myself being less social at this convention because you and I would normally just take ourselves a little bit further away from other people. Like if there was a show, we'd move our chairs like out to the side, like even where the chairs were set, and all the chairs were kind of set out like for that first show that we did. All the chairs were set out with, I mean, I'd say they were a meter apart, probably just under a meter apart, and very spread out. Oh, this is what I want to say. I did this juggling video about what every EJC gets wrong, and it's about having lots of people sitting on chairs and then having the stage too low to sit on chairs. And that pretty much assumes that everybody is going to be sitting shoulder to shoulder, either in chairs or on the floor. Like, you know, on these open stages at the EJC, we just pack everyone in.
As many
everyone
people
in. It turns out that if you lay out an audience, it didn't matter in the gala show venue, like the big main stage, because there was that hill that sloped up. So it didn't matter.
Actual,
amphitheatre. Everybody sitting was just looking over the top of the other person sitting in front of them, which was great, fantastic. But then the other place where we did like the fight night and when the other shows, like the street show stuff happened and the caravan show, because all the chairs were spread apart, it felt like everybody had an empty seat in front of them. And that's what, because everybody was taking, even though the seats weren't there, it felt like every second or third seat, only every second or third seat was occupied. Which meant that if something happens, you could always find an easy view through to the stage, even if it was too low, just by tipping your head slightly to the side. And the person behind would just tip them, and it didn't matter how many people tipped their head slightly to the side, you always had a view of the show. So that's social distancing worked really well in terms of that stage really wasn't high enough for the layout of the audience. But with a socially distanced audience where all the chairs were spread out, it actually worked pretty well. So that's another thing I wanted to mention. But yeah, just the kind of like the social distancing thing, like we are invited from a different culture, from a different country. We were like the only international guests there. Like everybody else in the show was French. Like I say, there was a few other people, like one or two people, like one person from Spain, one person from here, Italy. One or two people from Italy, like two Germans.
But the majority were French.
It was majority French, and I think this is the thing, because it was French, and most of the people there were from France. The French culture of how we're dealing with coronavirus kind of took precedent. And it was fine, and we from Germany, who maybe were a little bit like, oh, we want to be a little bit more distant, we could do that. But I think a large convention only works if it's lots of people from one country with the same set of rules nationally, coming together and all understanding what they're happy with in this way. And because of that, you and I, wanting to sit a bit separate, didn't interrupt the flow of the convention, didn't interrupt the socialness of the convention and all these other kind of things. It felt all okay. But I think if it had been like 20% French, 20%, oh, let's be real, 50% Germans, 20% French, like EJCs normally are, but with that big mix of lots of people with different expectations, I think a lot more people would have been a lot more stressed out about it. Like I could see you and I being a little bit more cautious than everybody else. Like when people were sitting down, lots of people were like, oh, we'll all join each other at one table, and we were like, yeah, well, that's not going to happen, you know. Like people were like, oh, we'll get together here and do this, and we'll be like a little bit more to the side, which did make us a little bit more distant.
Also, I could see that at the beginning, of course, the mask rules were very strict, and everybody was really looking out for it. They did get more relaxed, and I was very rigorous. I'm still very rigorous with wearing my mask.
But in the gym, it was like I say, I think it was actually very good in the gym. Most of the people in the gym, most of the time, the people who didn't wear masks really stood out in the gym by the end of it.
They did, and they got called out by me.
They were being patrolled and stuff like that. But that's one of the things that I think is very important now, which is a real pity because I love going to these EJCs. But if we get to the EJC next year, maybe they can get away with it in Finland because it's such a, like, it's a long way away. It's kind of self-limiting in terms of how many people will be there. Like the Joensuu EJC was very small, only about 800, 900 people or whatever it was. It was about 1,000 people, let's say. And an EJC in Almere, which has 6,000 people, or Munich, which is super central, has 7,000 people. It's not going to work, I don't think. I'm not saying this is the end of the EJC, but it's going to be really weird having lots of people from different cultures coming together to try and interact with each other. I disabled comments on my video I put them all up for moderation on my French Juggling Convention vlog, because I was like, I don't want to reply to, or don't want to have the comments flooded with people said, oh, that person was too close to that person, not wearing a mask, this and that kind of stuff, because anybody looking at a video like that can just point out and go, oh, that's terrible, but I didn't want it to be a bummer. You know, I didn't want the comments to be a bummer.
Yeah.
Even if I sort of agreed with sometimes sort of like, yeah, why are those two French people kissing each other as a greeting? I'm like two people kissing each other as a greeting as someone who hasn't done more than fist bump someone for ages,
yes,
like, is weird for me. But in France, they're like, oh, it's very close. I mean, it's very quick. You come in, kiss, 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 and then you're apart again or whatever. If French people are happy with kissing each other on the cheeks, that's fine. And I don't want to be a bummer telling them to stop doing that, yeah, because it's two people who have individually decided,
they consented to that,
to consent to doing that. And I didn't want the comments of the video. It turns out all the comments were fine.
Yeah,
like one of the comments was, did you just lose combat to somebody who was smoking a cigarette during the match? And I was like,
he actually smoked the cigarette during the whole fight night.
Well, for each match, he started a new cigarette and then one, which was good fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the mixing of cultures in this way of how happy you are, because again, you see these videos of these pictures of people doing crazy stuff in America where a virus is out of control, like still out of control, and I'm like, oh, that's terrible. And then I see people doing the exact same thing in New Zealand or Taiwan or these other like island nations which have like blocked off travel, have got their
cleared it away.
No new cases in the last 2 weeks, or even in Germany, which is sort of like, oh, well, there's new cases, but it's been like 50 new cases and 2 new deaths for an entire nation of how many people in Germany? 70? No, was it 70 million or 100 million? 80 million people, like
that's
that.
That's an old number, but
whatever. However many million people live in Germany, it's like I say, it's this thing, and in France as well. I don't know what the numbers are, and of course it's going to go up, and of course it's going to go down, and there's going to be ramp ups.
We know about the dance and hammer. And it's looking like that. I mean, of course, then people go now on holidays. People go now to Mallorca partying. It's quite crazy. Now coming back, bringing the virus back, and it's gonna be going up and down. And everybody needs to understand that it's not like it's not a linear thing.
No.
So.
But I don't see that juggling convention being any worse. Like all the tourist industry here in France is going up again. Restaurants are open with outdoor seating.
Yeah.
Like yesterday we were at the bike park. The bike park was just going as normal. They're like, when you're in the queue, put your face mask on. But the thing is, it's really tricky because everyone riding these mountain bikes had these full face helmets anyway.
So it's like your face mask.
That it wasn't like a face mask, but it's this weird kind of thing. But then you're on the side of a windy mountain and the face mask like in that kind of area. But that's just running as normal, and I don't see anybody.
I guess a bit fewer people than
maybe.
Than normal
but I'm saying
times.
Like the hotspots are people going to a nightclub and everyone dancing together in a nightclub.
Yeah.
The hotspots are like a sporting event with no social distancing, like in that the Adria tour with the tennis, when Djokovic got coronavirus and Dimitrov got coronavirus, but they're all partying together, and you're like, no, that's the sweaty parties at night in a enclosed space with no social distancing. That's where it's happening. A juggling festival where everyone's camping and there's rules in place in the hall and all that kind of stuff. I don't feel bad about that. If this was during like a really bad outbreak, I would feel bad about it, but that outbreak isn't happening in Germany. It isn't happening in France at the moment. It might be happening in Spain, but that's why they're closing the tennis tournaments, and maybe the Formula 1 isn't happening there.
They come down to more like closing locally, not like a whole country.
And that's why I think if these conventions are local, so they're saying, if this convention is cancelled, it isn't sort of like, but I'm from Germany, why can't I go to a juggling festival in where, let's say, France, or no, let's say Spain, because that's just being closed.
Catalonia.
Yeah, there was the convention is happening in Spain next year, although no, it's in 2 years, in Spain next year in Madrid, and because it's going to be drawing people from such a wide area, you're like, we're encouraging people to travel from lots of different places, and some of those places could be locked down, some of them could have travel restrictions. Maybe it's not really fair. So that's why I think each of these juggling festivals should be not hyper local, but like within national borders. And if you're going to invite an international performer, like the French convention invited me to organize the fight night and to perform in the show, you're really looking at like 1 or 2 special guests, but pretty much saying, look, if you're German and we're having a French juggling convention, this isn't for you. This is for French people with the French culture, with the French lockdown rules and the French current vibe. And if you're German, you can do a German convention, which is from like maybe the people just in Berlin. Like we'll have a festival and get together everyone from Berlin and do something in the open air, and it's going to be fine. We can do the fight night, we can play volley club, we can have a show in the evening, and we can all hang out in a picnic area, and it's going to be fine. You know, we can do that.
Yes.
We learned some rules from it. Or learn the lessons, let me put it that way.
We're evolving.
The lessons will change. Anyway, we've talked more than an hour about this kind of stuff. I think this is actually a really interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll publish this for widely on YouTube or whatever, but I think it's an interesting discussion of game design and incentives and different setups.
And I think it's just all of a presentation of how humanity is never a fixed point
Culture
in time.
isn't static,
Nothing is static. The same with work environment, work ethics. It's all changed because something else changed.
Yep.
And we're just going to see what works best. And we see, okay, for social interaction, online just doesn't work so well.
No.
And I don't think online juggling conventions are going to become a thing because
an online juggling convention isn't a social experience.
Yes, and this is kind of
this is what I wanted to say I've mentioned it to you before and I mentioned it to some other people. The reason why people are calling these online festivals or online conventions, I've seen it so many times, like Comic-Con online, and you know, whatever this gaming thing is online. I mean, games is different because you can actually play games online with people. But here's a book. The latest one was the World, which I saw with the World Science Fiction Convention or something. So like, it's an online convention, an online award ceremony, and what you're talking about, what you're actually talking about is online video streaming. And when people say it's an online party, what you're actually saying, you're calling it an online party, or you're calling it a Zoom call, because what you don't want to say is it's a video conference. Because people have negative associations with video conferences. Maybe I mentioned this in the last podcast, but people don't want to say, hey, let's get together for a video conference at work, and everyone's like, oh, a video conference. Who wants to do a teleconference, video conference? And you say, hey, let's get together for a Zoom party. You're like, oh. What we're doing is we're getting a group of friends together for a video conference, and it sounds fun a few times. And the juggling convention, it isn't an online juggling convention. It's an online video conference for jugglers, which can work. It is fun. It is a fun thing.
Definitely.
But it's certainly not a juggling festival, and I can really, really tell that after going to a juggling festival. And I was just like, I'm in heaven. This is great. I'm sitting and watching other people juggle. Not what they're sharing with me on Instagram. Not what they're showing me in their pre-recorded show in some live stream or whatever. Or it's sort of one person. Other people are deciding. I can just look around and I can decide. I mean, it didn't come across that much on the vlog that I was just hanging out, because again, it's that social distancing thing that like you can't get up there with the camera and all that kind of, but it's so great just to hang out and just watch people just try a club juggling pattern, like a club passing pattern for 10 minutes and not get it. You only get that at a juggling convention or a juggling club meeting, seeing like 4 people come together and like, can we get this passing pattern? I'm like, no, you can't, because you're just not good enough, and if it's going to take you like an hour of practice and you don't have the patience, I can just see right away. And you make the decision, you watch it play out in front of you. That's kind of a thing that I love about juggling festivals, like seeing people just try a juggling passing pattern, which is too difficult because one person is just a failure and they drop each time, and none of the other people are polite. They're too polite to say, hey, you're just not good enough, let's swap you in for some, that kind of thing. Like, it's like participatory, and just watching it is also participatory. You see the story. But I'm not gonna sit on YouTube and watch a live stream of 4 people failing at a club passing pattern. Because that's the only thing I can watch then. But at a juggling festival, I can just turn my head 10 degrees and watch somebody else try somebody. So that moment of somebody trying a trick and getting it, and one person over there clapping, another person over there clapping, and me also clapping, like 4 people, and you realise, oh, we all had the same thing in common. Us 4 people were all watching this guy try and do this shower trick, and when he got it, we all clapped, and he's like, yeah. 4 people saw me do that trick, and all 4 of us who watched it and clapped were like, yeah, we're all part of this live event, and you get that, and you don't get that on a Zoom call. You don't get that as a live stream.
No, there's just certain things that are not compatible.
No.
But we found that out now.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a positive thing, because we had all these things already in place. Everything was there. All the online stuff has been there. We now just used it like very extensively because nothing else could happen. And now we found out, okay, this thing works. this thing doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we can keep
and
this
again,
in the
all
future.
of these lessons are going to be have to learn. Every convention is going to learn these lessons over again, and they're going to come up with different solutions.
Yes.
That no,
for the different places.
They're not going to learn the same lessons. They're going to have the same problems or interesting problems, but each festival that happens from now on is going to come up with a different solution from before, which fits their culture, fits their rules.
Place.
Fits their venue, fits their timescale, fits their audience, and everything like that.
Yeah.
So
it's going to be more difficult in the winter when there's actually places with winter and cold.
Just not going to happen.
We're going to see what's going to develop and how this whole thing. I mean, nobody can really plan ahead, not really. So we will see what comes next.
See what we're up to.
Yeah. So there was some other convention.
New Zealand's going to be fine.
There was a Russian convention.
Well, it wasn't a convention. It was pretty much the same as this kind of thing. It's more like a local thing. Like 50 jugglers get together in a campsite. Okay. Like it's all these little dome caravan things that they're all in. So it's just, I think it was called the Flow Camp or whatever it was. And it's just a similar thing. Just get people together for a camping trip, and they happen to juggle, and they had a fight night. I still need to do all of those the fight night results from these last few festivals, which are getting there as well. Yeah, that's it. I could talk more about the combat and how the rankings are going to work, but that's still in flux. And what the if the end of year finals are going to happen, or
that all depends on external circumstances. Really.
Yes. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for listening to this. Thanks again to our Patreon supporters, all you guys and girls. Let's say guys, gender non-specific guys.
All you people. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks again to our parents for helping us out on this trip. Thanks to Rico for inviting us over. And giving us good food for the whole festival. It was really good.
I love the food. Thank you so much.
I could almost, if all vegetarian and vegan food would be that good, would be really good, I could mostly do it.
But then cheese.
Yeah,
so
cheese.
Not vegan.
Yeah, that's true. It wasn't vegan, was it? Because we were eating cheese every single meal.
Every time.
All right, so thanks a lot for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Goodbye.